Hey everyone, thanks again for joining. We're going to give a couple minutes. We got a lot of people jumping in now, so give a couple more minutes before we get started. Thank you. For those just joining in, we're giving it a couple minutes. We still have quite a few people coming in, so we'll get started here about a couple minutes past the hour. Thanks. All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. Just wanted to thank everyone again to start for joining us today. We've got a great list of attendees here, good representation of property managers and DMOs throughout the Rocky Mountain region. So to start, I want to emphasize, and we will throughout the webinar, that we'd really like to keep this as open of a webinar as possible. Please shoot your questions over. I'll make sure to pay attention as they come in and try to answer them real time. Got some great attendees, so would love to keep the questions rolling in. Jumping in to start, my name's Scott McLeod. I'm the COO over here at Key Data. We've been really humbled by the amount of interest and the data that we've been able to provide to DMOs and property managers through this time of need. Really been trying to keep things up to date as live and as often as possible through our website. KeyDataDashboard.com. We've got free data on there for different regions throughout the U.S. and the world. So please tune in there throughout the remainder of however long this lasts for some live updates. I've also got Jason Sprinkle. We'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hi guys. Appreciate everybody being here today. Excited to walk through some of the data. know a lot of you on the call, so good to be with you. As most of you know, I'm down in Northwest Florida, working in an office by myself today, like most of you, I'm sure, and excited to be sharing the stage here with Brumby and Scott to talk a little bit about data that I know is impactful for you guys. So look forward to it.
Then also have Brumby McLeod, long lost uncle of mine that I met a couple weeks ago.
Oh, we're gonna do cousin.
Cousins, our cousins. Either one works.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott and Jason. This means a lot. I'm a professor in the business school down at College of Charleston and have been studying vacation rentals and lodging for a couple decades, and didn't see this coming, that's for sure.
Great. So the outline, just to let everyone know the outline of the webinar that we're going to run through. We're going to run through national trends, regional trends, and then we're also going to go through the different data points that are going to be important for DMOs and property managers to be paying attention to for the recovery. Making sure that they see the data come in live is one of the most important things that we offer and that people need to be paying attention to. So while a little bit of the data to start out is sort of doom and gloom, we do have very clear paths at the end that we're going to run through as far as the data points to pay attention to on a day-to-day basis as they are changing very quickly. So a little background on key data. We pulled data directly from reservation systems. So we partner with property management companies around the world. Currently are partnered with a little over 700 property managers, which represents close to 200,000 units that feed us live data for their actual for their properties. Pull that data over. We provide a very robust revenue management tool for the property manager. We allow them to visualize their own internal data while also seeing how they compare to the market on a live updated basis. We also scrape data off of the major online travel agencies, or OTAs. Airbnb and VRBO are the two that we scrape. So we are able to pull total supplies for markets based on OTAs. Very careful to distinguish the differences between scrape data and real data. Obviously, owner holds and maintenance holds, which have become more so prevalent in the past month than they ever have before. Lots of people taking their units offline, mainly going to stay in them as an actual owner as well. So again, sharing this aggregated data to property managers, destinations, and through trend reports for different areas. So again, types of data. The direct source data that we pull is directly pulled from the reservation systems. Live, I should have clarified that we pull every 2 to 6 hours from all the reservation system we integrate with, and these provide you with 100% accurate KPIs: occupancy, average daily rate, and revenue per available rental. Important thing, again, as I was mentioning in the last slide, is that we are able to distinguish between owner holds, maintenance holds, and what the actual paid occupancy or paid and owner occupancy is for your region. Also, the average daily rate, we don't actually look at what it was advertised at, we look at exactly what that rate was booked at. Scrape data, we scrape data on a daily basis, so we'll go in and scan websites. We'll go on Airbnb, look at their website and see which units are available. If they are available, what's the price that they're listed at. Great to use this data for supply and demand, so looking at the total supply of a market. So this takes into account the rental by owners that we do not integrate with. And then again, looks at the total demand, so we can see if those units are actually booked or if they aren't showing availability on their calendar, or if they are actually available. So a great overall view of supply and demand. You can also estimate occupancy, average daily rate, and RevPAR through this data. It's just we caution you, as we've seen with our real data and comparing it to scrape data, how different those KPIs can be. What we do with our scrape data, we also pull feeder market data. So we pull the actual zip code data of where guests come from. So we can show you your emerging feeder markets. We can also show you your competitor feeder markets. For example, down here in the Panhandle where we're located, Walton County, which is on the Panhandle, can see where the feeder markets are for their competitors. So where are people that are going to Bay County booking from, and see if they're actually missing anyone in those markets. And again, if you have any questions, please make sure to shoot them over. We're paying attention, and we will make sure to answer them on a live or as close to live basis as we can. Jumping into the national outlook, I'll let Jason jump in here and sort of walk you through what we've been seeing over the past couple of weeks and what's changed up until now. Important thing to know too is it really does change on a daily basis. We've seen time and time again throughout the month of March and already through April that any update on the news, any presidential address will drastically change the data that we're looking at. So it really is important to keep an eye on it on a live basis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason to jump in here.
But yeah, so just, at the national level, obviously, we're seeing different markets that are being hit at a much different level. And it started out, you really had closures that were kind of happening sporadically. Now, of course, we've got 95+% of the U.S. that's essentially on some level of lockdown. So some of those differences are leveling out, but still fundamental differences in which markets are drive-to markets, which ones are fly-in, the affluence of the visitors. And so a lot of different things are kind of affecting each market. Perhaps most importantly, one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit more detail and illustrate through some slides is really how dependent certain markets are on different times of the year. Probably the biggest factor, as you would imagine, in terms of what impact that this crisis is going to have on those particular markets from a cash flow perspective and profitability. But if we look overall at some of the major trends we're seeing, and we're doing a lot of these webinars for kind of different sectors of the U.S. in particular, urban markets are being hit, particularly hard. Romy and I were talking about that right before we jumped on. We're even hearing about some of these kind of core urban players that are either out of business or considering going out of business. So I know that's been particularly hard for them, and that's reflective of the fact that downtowns aren't a great place to be at the current moment for obvious reasons. And then beaches and markets that are heavily dependent on both spring break and summer. Again, summer's still kind of an open issue, but the markets that get a significant portion of their revenue from the spring break season are obviously being battered from the impact because it's been so heavy during this last few weeks. And then, of course, fly-in markets, you don't have to turn the news on very long to see how bad the airlines have been hit. And most of your flights, I'm sure, aren't on the books anymore. And so markets that are fully dependent upon fly-in traffic, certainly more hit than others. We did see, and we'll go through some slides on this as well, so just want to kind of point it out so you watch for it. We did see a particular kind of correction in the booking that were taking place right around March 13th. And what occurred at that point, if you guys will recall, is that first week of spring break. Yeah, jump in there and see it where Scott's illustrating it. That the bookings there on that screen are the 0 to 30 days, and you see it occurred on 3/13. And what happened at that point is the markets decided kind of universally, we all recognized it wasn't a good idea to go on a cruise ship at the moment, and it was probably a good time to cancel your flight to Paris or your trip to Costa Rica with the kids. And so the world kind of collectively in the U.S. paused and said, where can we get to that's close by that we can drive to with our family and still embrace the spring break? And so one of the trends that I want to point out as we look at some of your individual data sets is just what amount of correction you had during that time, because a lot of people that we've been talking with are really looking at that as a leading indicator of the markets that are likely to bounce back quickly, because it shows a propensity to be able to capture last minute drive-in traffic when things get better. So I think when we get down and we start to see a little bit of ray of sunshine coming out in a few markets, the expectation is on our end that you'll see markets bounce back kind of in a similar fashion to the way they reacted to that initial 3/13, assuming they still have the same seasonality during that period. And while we've got you on this screen, I'll finish orienting you on it. This is bookings by date, and it's from January 1st to April 2nd. And so it's just looking at year over year. How are we doing this year versus how we were doing last year? And this is global data, and you can kind of see the key events that have taken place, through this COVID crisis. In the middle, obviously, 0%. So if you start on the left of the screen, you see the orange line or yellow is 0 to 30-day bookings. So bookings that are going to come in the next 30 days. Blue is bookings that are due to arrive within 30 to 60 days, kind of what I'll call kind of the unknown window during this crisis. And then the 60+ days are obviously bookings for more than 2 months out. And so it's interesting to look at how those behave differently nationally, globally, and particularly in your markets. And you can see globally, the year was trending ahead. We were all kind of above the 0% line for number of bookings that were taking place in January, as opposed to bookings that were taking place last year. And that was consistent for last minute stays as well as long-term stays. And then really when the first deaths started to happen in Europe around 214, you saw a little bit before that, but you really started to see kind of this beginning of a slide. And then particularly when you call out the US data, and you can see all this on our key data website, you see that obvious downward trend to the right where the bookings just fall off to nearly 100% difference in last year. Another way to say that is just the bookings have stopped. And it's still worth noting the difference in the the bookings within 30 to 60 days. For obvious reasons, that's kind of just a time frame where people have no idea what's going to happen. Is it going to be okay to travel then, or is it not going to be okay to travel then? And there's just not any bookings happening during that time frame. A little bit more comfort booking things for next week or tomorrow, like let's just drive down to the coast, or let's drive over to the to the lodge and stay next week. We know where it is. We can get there quickly. It's safe. Versus something in that 30 to 60 day window. So it's a pattern that you'll see consistent, but watch for the spike around 313 as well. You need to run through this one, Scott?
Yep.
So this is United States, and a couple of obviously 4 charts here. So I'm going to walk you through each of them and kind of orient you, because we're going to see these same charts for each of your markets, and I think it's helpful to consider how your markets are doing in relation to what you'll recall from this slide for the U.S. as a whole. So the first one, obvious COVID cases up and to the right. I do think when all of you, particularly the DMOs on the line, are looking at kind of what is the impact of my market of this virus, it's obviously critical to be looking at the data that we've got from a vacation rental impact and how your market's either seeing cancellations or bookings or occupancy. All 3 important to look at. I also think it's equally important for you to stay up to date, on the data that's out there on the COVID-19 viruses themselves. There's some really great websites that are out there that not only put all the national data out there for the news organizations, but really make it very visual to see. There's a public Tableau website, for example. You just search Tableau public and on Google, and you'll see it pop up, and you can put your state in or your region in, and you can really see when the virus is expected to spike and how your state's being impacted relative to other states. And I think it allows you to build that into some of your messaging as we start to see the sunshine come out. So I encourage you to study that data as well if you're not already doing so. The second slide there, very familiar format that we use, so I'll orient you real quick. This is adjusted paid occupancy. This is occupancy of guests taking out the owner stays and holds. So how much did you book out of the days you had available to book is the best way to think about it. And I'll start you there with the gray line, 2019 average paid occupancy final. So this is the occupancy for the United States, pretty flat. Obviously, every market has a different occupancy curve. Some urban markets tend to be flatter. Spring break markets tend to obviously see spring and summer peaks. And then, of course, winter markets you see over to the left. But if you look at the orange line, that's 2019 as it was pacing this same time of year. So obviously where the arrow is today. It's pacing for the year as it finished the year. But then pacing forward, you can see the gap. And so you can see the orange is where we expect to be this time of the year as a 4.6, as you see reflected. The blue is where we actually are this time of year for adjusted paid occupancy nationwide. And so really as we start to look at your regional and local markets on this data, we want to look at the difference between the blue line where we are and the orange line where we expect we should be. And that delta to the left of today is what we've already lost in terms of occupancy, and to the right of today is the obviously the occupancy that's at risk given today's current pacing. And the last thing I'll point out on that chart is you see kind of consistently it tapers down, but we're already being impacted well into June, some markets well into August, Some markets, summer's really not impacted. So I encourage you, as we look through these slides, particularly on your own markets, to pay attention to that gap between the orange and blue line and how far it extends out forward. That's really a great way to look at how the virus has already impacted your drop in bookings, if at all, going forward. And then the next slide, again, one we'll use frequently today, is a percentage change in bookings made this year versus last year. You can see again, we were pacing right at or just above it last year in terms of total bookings as a nation from the first week of January almost until mid-February. It hung in there, but then just a real precipitous drop all the way to the right to down in the 90 percentile in terms of loss of bookings. And then last but not least, another way to look at your data, whether it's in your PMS or the data that's being reported to you as a DMO, or whether you have access to our dashboards, you can look at the cancellation rates, right? So one thing to look at whether the bookings have dropped off. It's another thing to look at whether people are pulling cash back out of your pocket and pulling those reservations off the table. In this case, you can see obviously a giant spike in the percentage of guest nights that were canceled in that 326 to kind of 423 range. And you do see some cancellations all the way out to August in the national data, but obviously it tapers off. So as the gap starts to close there, you can see kind of watch where the confidence level is in terms of the U.S. vacation rental consumer in terms of at what point they're willing to hold on to their reservations. And right now it looks like that comfort level is somewhere in that early July timeframe, and they're pretty good. But prior to that, mid-June and back, we're starting to see a real drop. And that's changed over the last few weeks as we've done these webinars, particularly in the last week. In that first 2 weeks of June, we've started to see that gap significantly widen. So a gap worth watching during that time frame in your market.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just to bring everyone back up to speed, please make sure to shoot over any questions you have on the graphs as we go through them. We will get into particular data for your different regions. I know Jackson Hole, Park City, Summit County, Colorado, and obviously Summit County, Utah. So please pay attention as we jump in, and feel free to shoot questions over as we continue to dive into the data. Again, a lot of this data we will be showing later in the presentation. We'll go over specifically the data that we're going to pay attention to as markets begin to rebound, and what data points that we can pay attention to that'll make sure that you guys are first in line for making sure your marketing efforts are correct and measuring the recovery as we get to that point. All right, so jumping into regional outlook, we just as Jason mentioned earlier, it is looking a little stronger for the Rocky Mountain region than it is in other areas for the summer. So we'll jump into the particulars there. And again, questions as they come in, we'll make sure to answer those as we go. I'll let Brumby jump in to start this. I know this is one of his favorite graphs over here that's showing sort of percentage of total revenue and what we're looking at for the different areas. We did include a few different markets as well that you can have a comparison, but I'll let Brumby start here. And it looks like we have a couple questions coming in that we can get to as we go through.
Yeah, thanks, Scott and Jason. Appreciate it. Jason, this was one of my favorite graphs you did for the East last week. But one of the things you'll see, it's trying to show the percentage of the total revenue that's being lost in a given season if you don't get to reopen, essentially. And what was interesting about the Southeast is we were on the front end of the season, that first shoulder, and in the ski markets, we were on the tail end. So I think paying attention to how these markets and different seasonalities are operating is critical, because what we're going to see is certain communities' ability to reopen. So I think the data in specific markets is really important, because I call them hills of hope, those little bumps you saw on the last slide. What we ultimately want is a climb that's climb out, right? And those hills of hope, you'll see in Telluride, it's almost like, a couple hills, right? People are ready, they'll shift their vacation, do anything to get there. But what you see as we go later into the season, we start to lose a larger percentage of the revenue. Now, there's a lot more red flags on the following slide, because we're going into the peak season in the beach communities. Jason, you want to add anything as we look at these? I see you got Breckenridge, Winter Park, and Telluride accented here.
Yeah, just to clarify to Brumby's point, this is data like looking back at 2019, what percentage of your revenue you get from those particular months. So obviously, something like the Tennessee Smokies, if it impacts July and August, they lose 55% of their total revenue versus something like Breckenridge where it could extend out into August. And because that's not their primary season, as with most of you, it's less of a hit. Now, 40 versus 50% may seem academic if it's coming out of your top line revenue, but obviously gives a little bit, better opportunity to recover or perhaps survive. And Scott, if you go to the next slide, you'll see what Brumby and I were talking about from our last presentation. That's what it looks like, across the nation. And a lot of these markets that are heavily dependent upon spring break and summer, like 38 Beaches is where I'm sitting today. You see that if it drags out into July and August, we've lost 80%, 82% of our revenue for the year. So, hard to survive that hit versus a hit that is in no question substantial, but tends to be more in the 40 to 50% range for the folks on the phone today. So, the good news is the federal government's allocating help across the board without regard to this data. So we'll lock it back up after the presentation's over, and it hopefully will give you guys a chance to recover. But I know everybody's being hit across the country now, but we're kind of all waiting to see what happens in the next couple of months. So hopefully some of these charts that are coming up will give you some insight into that.
We had a question on marketing for last minute drive-in markets. Great question, and we actually do get particularly into that as we get a little further down the slides as far as micro or hyper local marketing for drive-in markets. That is really going to be a big presence as we get further into the summer. We've already seen a couple of property managers that Jason knows that have been marketing to hyper-local areas. I think it was a California property manager that's marketing to people only within 45 miles of the actual properties. So we'll jump into that and how we can use our feeder market data as well as the market's feeder market data for that as we get further down here.
Hey, Scott and Jason, I think one of the attractiveness of the vacation rental in this market, though, is the reopening is probably going to happen in single family residences. And the hotel inventory, we're 70 out of 180 hotels closed in Charleston already. So that demand is going to be higher for fewer units, but then you're also being guided by your local officials. We've changed nightly rental definition to 30 days now in South Carolina, kind of temporarily. And then cities are still deciding if that's long enough. Do they want you there 45 days or longer? So I think some of these regional examples will play out in best in practice, which means our marketing dollars can be very strategic because the parameters are going to be so specific.
Yeah, I'm excited about that, Brumby. I'm anxious to kind of watch and see what we're all expecting, which is as the sun starts to peak out, I think the expectation of everyone is it's going to peak out sooner in the private homes than it is in the hotels. And I think it'll be fun to watch that data illustrate that. So.
And I do think that feeder markets might be very different than what our DMOs on the call are typically used to seeing. And with that, it's going to be important to pay attention to what your neighbors are doing. What's the Vail market look like compared to Breckenridge? What are we looking at in Steamboat compared to others? So I think making sure to pay attention to that data on a daily basis is going to be important. And we'll continue to illustrate that as we go forward. Jason, you had a couple updates to this earlier today. I'll let you jump in and walk through here.
Sure. So a couple slides here in a row that are similarly formatted. So let me orient you. So this is Wyoming, updated as of April 6th, so yesterday. And what we're looking at in that top chart is adjusted paid occupancy. Again, our vernacular is that's number of guest paid bookings out of the number of nights that were available to book. And if you just ignore everything and just start with the dark gray color, you'll recognize kind of what we call the booking curve or the occupancy curve for Wyoming. And this is looking at it weekly from January 1st through September 1st. And so first 9 months of the year, and you can see kind of obviously the peak for the ski season, and then a nice peak for summer tourism as well, both in the 70 and then going up to the 80% for the summer time frame. And then again, the green is where we expect to be or where we were last year as a 4/5 or same day a week last year, last Monday or this Monday that last year. And then the blue is where we actually are. And so I've added some color to these charts to be able to kind of highlight it. But the difference in the green and the blue before today, which today is represented obviously 4/6 of the day we pulled it yesterday by the dotted line, that reddish shaded area is occupancy that's been lost already, presumably as a result of the pandemic. And then to the right, what we're really looking at in terms of impacts, and it's what we're studying in all these charts, is that kind of the yellow area, and you can see some more yellow area there around the middle of May, or the beginning of May, excuse me, that's not highlighted. But it's really, you know, how far below last year pacing for occupancy are we? So how far off of where we expected to be? And, you know, the good news for Wyoming is not necessarily what you see in this chart, but what you don't see if you looked at charts from most states around the country, particularly those that are heavily dependent upon your summer traffic, that yellow area is more defined, meaning there's a greater drop off of pacing, and then more importantly, it's more extended. And if you actually look forward from July through September 1, Brahmi, looks like we got some good news that we're still pacing ahead, you know, which we aren't seeing in a lot of markets. We're seeing some that are flat, but I guess the expectation is a little bit more wide open spaces in Wyoming. I haven't spent any time in Wyoming, but I probably share the sentiment of most of the country, which is if I'm trying to get away from viruses, Wyoming sure sounds like a good place to do it. And so my guess is that's why we're pacing ahead a little bit late in the summer. You got any thoughts on why we're still up there, Bromby?
Well, I think this is the shift of your vacation, right? And we're probably going to see a length of stay increase that's pretty dramatic, which will reduce the amount of available inventory. I expect that blue line to keep climbing in Wyoming and many of these Western destinations, if they're willing to let in second homeowners or outsiders, as long as they're not standing there in front of the community.
Yeah, that's a great point. The length of stay is something that I know all of our property managers that work with Key Data have been, you know, continually discussing internally with our partner advocates that work with them on a weekly basis, as well as all other property managers, and sort of what those rules and what their thoughts are going to be as far as how to adjust that length of stay, and then also how to use the credits that they've given a lot of people that have had to cancel in the past couple weeks, you know, how that length of stay is going to impact that. So Jason, owning a property management company as well, is going to dive into that a little bit further as we look at the specific data points you want to pay attention to for the rebound. So stay tuned for that for the property managers we have on board.
And then, yeah, just for relationship, you can see there at the bottom the bookings and then the number of corona cases. So switching to Colorado here, same chart, a little bit more consistent impact over the last month and a half since the virus broke out there. Really in the kind of 2/23 time frame through 4/6, you can see there in red, just a consistent what looks like about 20% peel off in the occupancy that's already been lost. And then a little bit more, extended period of time here. If you remember the last slide, Wyoming was recovering starting in 7/1. Colorado already taken a hit all the way through August 1st, and then really not seeing that optimism in the market until a little bit further out, kind of in the August to September timeframe where it's flat. So this is more consistent with what we're seeing around the nation, and more consistent with kind of the pattern we're seeing even in, Bromby's neck of the woods up in Charleston or down where I'm at, although ours tends to be a more exaggerated gap. So definitely an impact to Colorado, and definitely an impact that's already being seen all the way to August 1st. And I did want to point out, we talked about, if you look down at the bookings per day chart, we talked about that pronounced spike that we saw on 3/31, and we got it circled in red there to highlight it. I don't know if that's the full, I probably said mountain of hope. I mean,
Hills of hope.
Hard to tell. Hills of hope. That's right. It's hard to tell if that's a hill of hope or a periodic speed bump looking back to the left. But it did occur right at the exact time that we saw that shift, and people drove in last minute, and canceled their cruises and canceled their family trips to Mexico, and tried to rebook in the markets they could get to, and still experience that first week of spring break with their families. And so I'm hopeful for Colorado to say that that's enough of an indication that it's a market where they can pull last minute drive-in traffic, doesn't require you jumping on a plane, got enough affluent customers who can make a last minute decision as soon as the storm clears, or as soon as the governor lifts the bans or open up the area, to kind of shift in and take advantage of that. I guess time will tell if that peak is in fact the leading indicator, but certainly seems to be.
Yep, absolutely. So we're going to jump into specific regions here. I know that we've got a lot of DMOs that are on the line that are not listed here. So please take a look at our website for market-specific data for your region. If it's not up there, you can shoot us an email, and we can work with you to get that information over to you. So jumping into our pacing activity by destinations, again, we've got Summit and Eagle ski areas, Jackson Hole, Telluride and Mountain Village, and Park City area as well. We've got some good news looking forward in a lot of the markets. Obviously, it all depends on really what the news is and on the virus. Obviously, it's changing every day as far as outlook, and obviously our behaviors for our travelers as well. I'll let Brumby and Jason sort of jump in and talk through this. Want to remind everyone, please make sure to shoot questions over. Specifically, I know that we've got a lot of DMOs on here connected to these areas, so would love to keep the open lines of questions coming in.
Yeah, Brumby, you know these markets better than I do. I'll just from just looking at the data itself, I see similarity in Summit and Eagle with Park City. Not a super pronounced summer booking in the gray line, as a normal market trend. That's the 2019, normal trend, 40% there in June and July. But in both of those markets, you can see really no impact that's substantial, that's significant enough to see in the data in terms of how we're pacing for summer versus where we should be pacing for summer. And it's worth noting that you're really down in that 10% booking range anyway, so there's not a whole lot of bookings on the books for summer. And you'll see in a slide coming up, we're really just at the part or the point in time where we would see those bookings. And so be real anxious to watch, and you'll see in the slide in a few minutes, the next couple of weeks are where we're going to see whether that green and blue lines start to separate significantly for Summit and Park City. And I think that's going to be heavily dependent upon, the news and what we see in terms of the outlook for the virus. Conversely, if you look at Telluride and Jackson Hole, which have a much more pronounced summer, up there in the 70%, 80% for most of the time between, June and in through July, at least, you see that more significant pull away in terms of the pacing. Telluride, a pretty good drop all the way from 613 to 725. And I would expect that to continue, although as you go out to the right, obviously the blue begins to cross the green, indicating that there's some more confidence there as we move into August. Jackson Hole, a little bit back and forth, but definitely some loss of confidence from May through July. And so I think, if I'm a DMO in that market, I'm watching, every couple of days, and I'm seeing, are we closing that gap between the green and the blue, or are we gaining on last year? And Scott made the point at the beginning that this data is changing pretty dramatically on a daily basis. Obviously, when the president stands up and says things are going to look better by Easter, we see a shift back, and you see some confidence that it builds. And then if it says, it's going to be August or perhaps in the next year, then we immediately see a shift back. So I think it's an anxious nation that's kind of waiting on the latest news. It's starting to settle in. It's a little less erratic like the market, but definitely something that's changing on us on a constant basis.
And that's a great point, which we'll get into a little bit later too, is when that occupancy does start pacing ahead, or when those bookings start coming in, it's going to be important for DMOs to know where those feeder markets are. Again, hyper-local feeder markets we really have seen in anecdotal data, as well as, actually in some real data here as well, that it really is going to pick up quickly. So paying attention to when those bookings start coming in, not only where are they coming from, but what dates are they booking for, will be important. And we'll get into the specific slides here. They're going to walk DMOs as well as property managers through the exact data points to pay attention to as we get into it.
Scott, these are beautiful destinations. I find that Telluride, Jackson Hole, that strong summer season overall with festivals and beauty and cooler temperatures. They're also not easily accessible from dense urban markets, particularly by air, but air might be non-consequential this year. What concern me if I see Jackson Hole and Telluride not start to recover. Park City and Summit County, Colorado, those have an ability to do a very short booking window if they wanted. But without those festival and events, we might, and the national park closure near Jackson Hole, those could be problematic. But certainly have strong seasons in Jackson and Telluride.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And also, as we get a little bit further in, we'll highlight it again. But I really do believe that the way that people stay ahead of it and really pay attention to the data, if the Park City, or if the national parks do stay open, who starts booking, what's the booking window that's coming in. So making sure that property managers are actively working with their DMOs, their local DMOs, is going to be the best way for people to recover, is really a joint combined effort of looking at all the data available and making sure to act on it as quickly as possible. So jumping into our booking activity by destination. So this is what we've been showing you previously. So it's comparing the total percentage of bookings last year compared to this year. We've got a couple outliers here, which we can jump into. Again, orient yourself, Summit and Eagle ski areas here, Jackson Hole on the top right, Telluride and Mountain Villages, as well as the Park City area. Jason, I know we were surprised with the Telluride data here. Looked into it with our data science team as well as the other data that was pulling in. Again, this is for future bookings. This isn't for current occupancy, so it's important to differentiate between the two. What do we find there, and what's that sort of standing out from?
Yeah, so I mean, this is, and we've looked at a lot of these curves. So this is how many bookings are being made on any given day, and those dates are small, but that's just January 1st through today, and you can see where it drops down below. What we haven't seen in almost any market is that turn back up. That's what everybody's been looking for. When you look at that Telluride and Mountain Village data, according to our data scientist team this morning, that looks like a particular couple of bookings where people came in and blocked off early next year. So far out bookings as opposed to short-term bookings. So confidence that is placed in the market, but certainly not, anytime in the near future. But it did cause a swing back in that market. So anxious to dig into that data set a little bit more. Telluride's one of our partners, so I'm anxious to get in there and look at the bookings and kind of see exactly what's happened. But listen, I'm happy to see it turn back up for any reason in any of these markets in terms of bookings. I know,
that's right.
It might not result today in spend in the restaurants and some of the activity providers, but it certainly puts cash back into some of those accounts and provides some hope for the vacation rental companies that are paying the bed taxes and hopefully providing the resources that we need for these DMOs. And so a little bit of the same in Park City. And, that's one of the things that we're going to be putting out as much as anything. We're constantly looking at these curves, and Scott and I, basically every meeting the same starts out the same every morning with the data team is find me somewhere where we've got some sun or some good data showing so that we can, put the good news out. So glad to see some turn up in those two, but I think it's still a little too early to count that as a recovery of any sorts.
We had another good question come in. Do the new bookings include reservations moved from earlier dates? Jason, I'll let you walk through that, and then I can jump in as well. I know that's something that we've been tackling throughout all the different reservation systems and how that's being handled.
Yeah, the fair answer is it's, pardon the French, but it's hard as hell to track some of that. Every vacation rental company, and we're talking about companies that really operate in about 40 different property management systems, has had a different methodology for what to do when they pull that reservation off and they still want to keep it in the accounting system. So some are placing it several years out into like 2025 so that it doesn't block up their calendar, but it stays in as a link. Some are pulling them off and rebooking them. And so it's something that the data teams had to pay real close attention to. The particular ones in Telluride that you see do not reflect changes. They reflect new bookings as I understand it, but we'll dig into that and confirm that for our Telluride partners, as well as our Park City area. But it's a great question and very insightful because it's something that we are watching for. We certainly don't want to take move reservations and count them as new reservations. In most of the PMSs, we can catch that. In others, it's a much more manual process. So something we're cognizant of, but something that's taken a lot of time to make sure we avoid.
And it's a great question too, that sort of brings up a lot of the things that we've done in the past month. Obviously every company in the world has been impacted by this, and they've changed the way that they're doing business. They've changed the methodology behind what they're providing for, their partners and their customers. And that's exactly what we've seen as well. We're working with some of our property management systems who weren't recording the data we were for cancellations, that have now had to ingest data that we've been pulling out of their system to bring it back into their reservation system. Cancellations, again, the way we track cancellations was up until March 1st, something that not many people paid attention to. I know that Panama City, obviously with Hurricane Michael in 2018, paid very close attention to that and how that impacted not only occupancy and then also cancellations and the change over the previous year. But we've continued to adjust the way that we pull our data and what we're continually doing to provide to our partners, as well as our DMO partners. Finally, jumping into percent of canceled nights by market, you can see some very clear distinguishing things here. Summit County obviously being one of the first people to jump on closing down their market. Strong increase in percent of canceled nights for the beginning of April. Jason and Brumby, anything to add in here?
Not other than that, whenever you're looking at a percentage change, if you're in a really slow season where you have a small amount of data, you'll see a lot of that erratic movement like you see in Telluride. And so, when we look out there, and again, y'all know these markets a little bit better than me, but when you look out in the markets there where we really don't have a whole lot of bookings, I don't get super excited about a 20% cancellation rate. We see that in some of our urban markets on a normal, basis in a typical year. So nothing that really stands out dramatically there to me, other than, it is slowing down. I take that as a good thing.
Yeah, I'm interested in the shape, particularly Telluride. Kind of, are we there? Right,
Yeah.
And then you see that climb out on Summit County and Breckenridge near the end, but then you see it dip right off at the end of the page. But I think a lot of this had to do with policy and municipal decisions that forced the DMO's hand.
Yep.
Absolutely. And again, data is updated daily. It changes daily. We've seen that in the past month more than we ever have before. So paying attention and seeing really what's happening in the market. I do know that from the data we've seen in China, there's a pent up need and urge to travel. So while it's very early to make judgments based off of what we're seeing in other areas around the world, I do think that we'll see a quick turnaround on a daily basis as we go forward. So paying attention again to those feeder markets, to your percent of canceled nights and bookings by date is going to be important as we go forward. So into a little bit more on the property management side, Jason's going to spearhead this as he owns the property management company separately, based out of Breckenridge and the Florida Panhandle here. Jumping into there, and then we're going to jump into specifics as far as the data that we are going to use to make sure that everyone's front and center for the recovery here, and making sure that they're on the leading path for recovery.
Yeah, so just, leading indicators, however you want to look at it, it's important for DMO to kind of think of it from a property manager's standpoint and to have that relationship, particularly the bigger players in each of your markets. If you're not working with them on the phone, I suggest you jump on and just talk through what are their policies. Are they refunding cash? Are they refunding credits? A lot of the markets are principally one or the other. Those that are offering credits, like a lot of the bigger hospitality companies, some are doing it because they want to have a hook to draw back in an early recovery. Some of them are doing it just out of necessity of cash flow. As you can imagine, vacation rental companies, very cash flow driven businesses where you have these high peaks and then sometimes 9-10 months of just losing money to make it all in a season or two. And so it's a real challenge. Less important, like if you look at us, less of a hit in Breckenridge where it didn't crush us in our peak season versus down on 30A where it really hit us at about the maybe 1 week later than what would have been worst case because it just wiped out spring break and it's potentially going to wipe out summer. So being cognizant of is there a big significant book of credits that are in your market that are just waiting, like if I'm in Park City and a couple of key property managers there, do they have a pent-up demand or people starting to rebook with the bigger ones? And August and September, or some people are already starting to fill back up in July? You know, what signs of hope are you seeing? Or are they really just holding off and waiting? So something to watch, and sometimes you can hear it talking with the folks before you can see it in the data, that like Scott said, it's hitting pretty quick day to day nowadays. And then the bounce back rate, you know, is that 313 bump that we saw in so many markets, is it a leading indicator? Are the luxury markets going to bounce back quicker? You know, at this point, a lot of talk about it's become more than just a virus, right? It's become obviously an economic meltdown, for lack of better terms. And how long will that last? And will the recovery packages put Americans back in a position to travel, or there's too many businesses that got hit too hard for too long? And so, you know, I think there's still some expectation that the drive-in markets will recover quickest, that the luxury markets will have a little bit more insulation from those. And then, if nothing else, I think that 313 spike was an indicator of a market's ability to react, as Brumby was saying, to kind of a last minute, who wants to come in next week, right? Who can get here? Do I have an urban market that's close to me? And then when you look at the rates, you know, we've got a lot of questions about ADR and what companies are doing, and are we going to see a precipitous drop in rates? And is that going to, even if we recover for July, is our rates going to be way down? Is that going to hit our bed taxes? You know, the weight of the thinking out there that I've heard seems to be that it pays off better not to lower your rates. And typically in these scenarios, I know there's Smith Travel's put some data out about prior events like 9/11 and some of the other viruses, and really what the impact was to those who lowered their rates to try to drag some people in, and versus those that held the course. And then should you adjust your length of stay? A lot of these markets, they require in their peak season a 7-night stay. I think if you look like down around the beaches where we are, a lot of people were that first couple of weeks, and I think you saw, if you recall back on the Colorado and Wyoming markets, you saw some similar stuff. But this first couple of weeks of summer, particularly Colorado, where it's already clear that it's been impacted and you're down 15-20%, like, probably makes sense to consider opening up those first couple of weeks, right, and allowing a little bit more fluid booking policy, particularly if you've got credits from spring where the bookings were cheaper and they're trying to use them in the summer. If somebody's got a $3,000 booking, they're not going to be able to book it in July at a $7,000 stay. Give them the opportunity to book a 3 or 4 day booking. And then last but not least, you know, if you've got people that have all these credits from, you know, the March timeframe, and they're out expecting to use it, when is that space that they're going to start to use it? Is it going to be July or August or September? So we've had a lot of customers that are talking about kind of mirroring their fall rates to what they had in the spring. If the fall rates were lower, they're bringing them up to match it, so that when the credits do get applied, they're maximizing the revenue there. So lots to think about, but we're seeing a lot of people making those adjustments to their ADRs and their booking policies to try to make sure that they're as prepared as possible to capitalize on the recovery.
Great. And I know, guys, we're getting close to time. We've got 8 minutes left, so please shoot over questions as we go through the final slides here. Again, these are some of the more important slides as far as the recovery, so we'll make sure to jump through them a little quicker, but shoot over questions as they come up as well. So using data to stay ahead. First signs of recovery, as Jason was mentioning throughout the presentation. What's our percent change in bookings by date? The Telluride was a great example of that spike that they saw. You know, during April is a low booking time for Telluride. They did see a spike, but the percent change compared to last year was still a little lower than it was previously. So making sure to pay attention very closely to percent change by bookings. And then again, getting into where people are coming from and which feeder markets they're coming from. So when people are starting to book, what are the dates that they're actually booking? Are they looking for that 0 to 30 days out window? Are they doing the 30 to 60 out, or are they really booking for a few months ahead of time? That's really going to help drive marketing, not only for property managers, but of course destinations as well. So data that we're using and reports that we're using to look into that in particular, the DMOs and property managers that are on the call here are very familiar with these graphs, as they've really been what we've been working with property managers on, as well as DMOs, to pay attention to when the recovery comes back. So when bookings start increasing, or when do they start increasing? one thing we're paying attention to. We're also paying attention to our competitors, right? So with our dashboard and with property managers that use our dashboard, you can look at your competitors, so other property managers in the region or other destinations that you compare yourself to, and see if they're starting to increase in bookings. Not only
Scott,
once you see,
Jason?
yes.
Could one of y'all set this slide up for us to give us a little bit of the calendar date? So I see that green peak in the middle. What date is that? It's just a little hard to see if you'd walk through it a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great question.
Scott.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I think that's bookings and change by percentage date. Obviously, 0 being how we did versus last year to break even, green being we did better than last year. We're booking more on a daily basis, and then that time frame runs up through today on the far right. So is that February 1st through today, Scott, or is that January 1st?
Yeah, that's February 1st. So showing a strong February, it's what we expect to see in percent change and bookings by date. So, increases, ebbs and flows throughout there, and then it really starts dropping down mid-February. We did have a peak here in the beginning of March, but sort of consistent fall down since then.
Where's March 13th on this one? If you could put
March 13th is going to be right. Let's see. March 13th is actually right here, so a little bit smaller of a spike than what we'd seen in our other graphs.
Yeah, okay.
And we've making the sample graph here. We're making these charts available on our website for most states and a lot of the regions. If you don't have it, let us know. We'll get you some data. But as Scott said, kind of watching for other signs of hope in other markets is a great way to see when the sun's going to come out for all of us.
And when you see those signs of hopes, we're also going to look at, and I'm going to jump past this and come right back to it. When you see those signs of hopes in other market, you can actually jump in and see where they're drawing their guests from. So seeing what the feeder markets are by booking date. So I'm going to jump back, or actually, Jason, if you want to jump in on this one, and then I can walk through the previous graph we jumped past.
So let's do things kind of winter guest booking for, which is a slide Scott's going to go back to, and then where are they coming from, right? So feeder market data, right? If you look at the bottom, that's just a sample of what the feeder market data in one of our screens looks like. These are 2019 for the entirety of the year. Where do my guests come from, right? It's hard to see on these small screens, the pinks, the more concentrated feeder markets, and then red down to yellow. And so, what's important here is not the data you're seeing on the screen there. It's just this idea of being able to understand exactly where your feeder markets are for the next coming months, the upcoming window that you're trying to book. And so if we look at summer, for example, particularly kind of that mid-June to starting into August, where we're all focused on right now, some of us are slipping more than others. It's important to go in and to say, where's my feeder market traditionally for those markets? But I think perhaps more importantly, as Brumby and Scott and I have been talking about, is how is that likely to shift over the next couple of months, right? Scott was alluding to some examples that we had gotten from customers, one of them in Hilton Head, one of them in California, where they've done some real targeted marketing that basically says, look, shelter in place, do your part, become shelter in a nicer place down the road. We got nicer places on the beach. You got meals at your house. Drive-in markets that are within 60 minutes to kind of 3 hours. And so you can go back even over the first few weeks of spring break where the virus started to hit us all and see where did I pull last minute traffic from, right? I think that's likely to be more reflective of where you're going to pull it from as the sun starts to come out first than where you did traditionally. And so I would encourage you to go back and look at your feeder markets over the last couple of months, kind of compare that to what in terms of bookings that have happened in the last couple of months, as opposed to necessarily saying traditionally, where do I get my summer bookings from? I think you might find a closer parallel to people who are coming in, and Scott was referring to as kind of a hyper-local market. But that marketing that we saw, we only got a few weeks of it, seemed to be very productive for those that engaged in it. And if you look at that top booking window chart, most of you, the DMOs will recognize that booking curve chart. It's when do people start to book for summer. So you've got arrival dates there of 6/3 to 9/9. So when are those bookings happening? And as you go from far out to the right to the left, you see the change in time. And today is the change between the dark and the faded blue. And so you can see as the curve, you move to the left as time progresses. And so if if you see where we are today, we're right at that precipice to where bookings for summer start to happen for these markets. And so, now's the time for the virus to give us a little bit of break and to let us get summer booking. But when you're considering where to market, give a little bit more thought to, who you can get last minute drive-in traffic from, as opposed to where you traditionally pull, like particularly at Jackson Hole, where you get so much air traffic from. Think about a shift in your marketing to attract a more local market.
A couple questions coming in. Had one in regards to competitor market data and seeing where their feeder markets are coming from. That is something we do provide for our partners. So shoot us an email afterwards, and we can sort of walk you through exactly what data you'd be looking for there. Jumping back again to guest check-ins by booking date. So this is for when guests, for the past 7 days, when guests booked, what their arrival dates were for. So to orient yourself, again, this is just a chart of no particular market. It's just a sample of what we can show you. So this is March 30th to April 5th for when the bookings happened, and then these are their arrival dates down at the bottom. The light blue is historically 2019, and then the dark blue is 2018. So looking at the specific arrival dates, this is going to be something that when those bookings do start increasing, we're going to want to see when people are booking for those particular markets.
Yeah, there's so few bookings right now that it really wasn't going to show you a lot of data to put every one of your little markets up. It's just, I mean, it's nothing or next to nothing for almost all of us in the country. But to Scott's point, as guests start to book, I mean, I know I go out and talk to a reservationist and they say, hey, we got $30,000 or $50,000 worth of bookings yesterday or this weekend, which is a fraction of what we should be getting. And my first question is, when are they booking for? Are they coming in for June or July or August? Like, where is that confidence level? And it not only is it a real indicator of what you should do from a budgeting perspective, whether it's your tax revenue or if you're a property manager, your cash flow, it's also an indication, more importantly, perhaps, of where you should be starting to think about your marketing dollars, right? If people are booking for fall, run with it. As my dad used to say, dance with the lady that you brought, right? If that's what people are looking for, then market to it and appeal to it. And if they're coming from far away, play into that. But if they're more likely coming from nearby drive-in markets, then go ahead. It might be very odd for you to be marketing fall right now to local drive-in markets, but that, it's a sign of the times, and read the data to help guide you.
Great. A couple more questions coming in, and again, that is the end of the presentation. A couple more questions coming in. A lot of people are wanting to access this data. If you visit keydatadashboard.com, we've got live updates. You'll see a COVID-19 tab on the top of the page. We'll have live updates that are updated on a daily basis for each individual region. We will not get into the sub-regions as much on our site, but you can email in for particular sub-regions, and we also will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone that attended and those that weren't able to attend as well. We'll leave it open for a couple more minutes in case any other questions come in, and I will look forward to those questions. And if we can't, if you think of something afterwards, please feel free to just shoot us an email over at dmo@keydatadashboard.com, and we will be happy to answer any questions that come up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, all three of us, Brumby's certainly the data nerd of the group. We're becoming data nerds more just by virtue of the fact that we've got access to some pretty interesting data at this juncture in time. But happy to talk through any of your data with you, or brainstorm about what may be happening in your market or other markets, or how it compares. So in any way we can help. We know we're kind of all collectively in this together at this point, and so if Key Data, or I'm sure Brumby, can be of help to you guys, happy to jump on the phone and talk through it with anybody at any time.
Scott, and Jason, how can DMOs improve their data view? What do they need to do to get a better and better picture using Key Data?
It goes back to what Scott said. It's really, our data is driven from a collaboration, with property managers in their market. And so we've got a lot of DMOs that have been very active in building that data set with their partners in their market, and they really have worked, real close with them, and they tend to have the better data sets. The ones where the DMO is reasonably, unconnected to the property managers, the most part, we're still able to get a good data set, but it certainly helps when, you know, when a DMO steps into a market and says, hey, we use this data on a daily basis, and our job and goal is to bring down more visitors at a higher ADR rate to fill your rooms. And yeah, collaboration between the two really makes a difference in what we're seeing.
Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate the question.
Great. Well, again, please visit our website for the live updates. Those are on a state-by-state basis. I don't think we'll have any individual sub-markets. If you are interested in working with Key Data as a client, you can email in and we'll walk you through the specifics of the data that we'll be able to provide, as well as the competitive market data. Again, thank you all for your time today. Really appreciate it and look forward to continuing to update our live data on our website to help you guys as much as we can during this time.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, everyone.